Okay,
All right, let's rock and roll.
we'll open up the subcommittee on Senate Bill 297. And
Here we go.
so who's here and who's not here?
So everybody but Thaxton is here. for
Right.
This committee.
And I saw Representative Gibbs, but,
She's here. She's here. She went to the ladies' room.
okay, okay. Okay. So I believe we have a new amendment in front of us, and the department, is this all good? Okay, so even though everybody says it's very daring that I do this, but I will ask, is is there anyone in the room who can specifically tell me something that needs to be fixed in this amendment?
Going once.
So I know that I did mention, yes, you can, all right, sure, come on up. And given that the conversation we had yesterday, I am certainly open to the idea that of what I had proposed, that this could be a dual system. Okay, so what I would be interested in is what, if perchance you might want to consider going down to the insurance department, what would you see in this amendment as we're writing it that you would see changed? But in terms of, as far as the 5B section, as I'm aware of, is the amendment that, came out to address the funds for the cities and towns, and I understand that's one. And if they're, in terms of how we get there, I understand that is a possibility.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Lisa Duquette, Executive Director for School Care, a public entity risk pool that's been in operation for 30 years, serving approximately 100 public entities in New Hampshire, just over 25,000 unique lives, and representing $250 million of public entity taxpayer revenue as our contributions. Thank you for the opportunity to provide further comment, Chairman Hunt. I have a couple things that I think are different that I didn't bring up yesterday. And so out of respect, that's where I'm going to focus on some areas where I think additional attention is needed. On page 2, I have yesterday's line numbers, so now I'm going to have difficulty telling you line numbers. 420 R2 in that section is what I'm going to say, starting with H. I just think the committee could benefit from being aware that this language seems to allow commingling of public entity risk funds. And if we go back to the local government center and the commingling that happened then when they were subsidizing property and liability program with healthcare funds, I believe that this language here may allow that to continue to happen. And I'm just not sure if anyone realizes that or if that is the actual intent of the
so
legislation.
what section, you say just H, the whole pool risk management?
420 R2,
Or,
and
right,
I started with
H.
H.
Right, so any particular one in there that says it, or is it, you just need, there needs to be clarifying that you can't?
I'm not an attorney. My lay read of this is it appears to allow commingling.
Got it, okay?
I'm now going to go to, and again, I apologize, I'm going to have to tell you section numbers. I'm on Roman
that's
numeral
fine.
5 on old page 5. So 420 R4, licensure required. And I am down to Roman numeral 5 underneath that. And again, I just want to point out, I know that I tried to bring it home yesterday, that a lot of what's written in here is written like we're in insurance, yet the words say we're not insurance. 5 Roman numeral 5, and then also under 420R5, immediately underneath that, Roman numeral 2, talks about producer licensing. I did look up last evening 402J. That seems to let me get the word out, indicate that we would need to go through a study process, an examination process, and all receive producer licenses. And this is anyone who's out just servicing the members that we're servicing, or presenting based on a request from a group for information about what our program is. This is what insurance brokers do. We're not brokers. We're not insurance consultants. So it seems, again, one very strong piece. And I have no idea. I'd love to know, what is the time frame? What's the study time frame? What's the testing time
I
frame?
thought you were grandfathered from this.
That's what it seems to say.
Would
That
you be
it says,
grandfathered from having to do this because they're already?
A pool risk management program does not have to get a producer license.
so can I ask a question?
Certainly.
So under 420R5, I'm just trying to read this. It says in Roman numeral 2, pooled risk management programs shall be governed by this chapter and shall be exempt from this title except for the provisions of. And then
Right.
there are numerous provisions, including 420J.
Correct. So let me just give you my little pitch to this, and all the committee members know where I'm coming from, but you're going to hear this for the first time, okay? And this I've been doing this for a very long time, and I have a rule, and it's called John Hunt's rule of licensure. Okay, the concept of licensure, and licensure is a mechanism that we, the legislature, have created in lieu of passing a law. So in other words, instead of saying you can do this, and if you do this, we're going to take you to court. We're going to do that, we're going to take you to court. We're going to do it. You know, you break the law, now we're going to have the Attorney General, so we created licensure. So we have license in this committee. We have insurance licensure. We have bank licensure. We even have liquor licensures, and we got lots of those. Okay. What is different is that what licensure means is that this is our methodology. This is our mechanism to regulate. Okay. And so that, yes, there are elements of what you do are very similar to insurance. And so therefore, this section of the bill, which is that the fact that now you're going to be licensed. All right. Now, needless to say, if we come up with this dual model and you think you'd much rather be operated with having a Secretary of State, which just simply does everything by statute, and if you violate the statute, they take you to Superior Court. But in this case, what we do with entities, businesses, whether it's insurance or liquor or banking, and it goes beyond. It's, licensure is real estate. I mean, you used to see how many different licenses we have in this state. Okay. All of what you're seeing here, and you say, so you go back and you look at each one of those RSAs and see what that RSA is asking you to do. It really is going to be something related to what you do. And it's just a matter of making sure that in this statute, you understand which RSAs affect you,
Okay.
which is no different than you would have if you stayed with the Secretary of State's office, which is everything is done by statute. This is just giving you the actual statute in which they're using as the regulatory force. But at the end of the day, that the issue is you are a licensee.
Okay. I understand. I appreciate that clarification.
Yep.
We're under 420R7, approval of rates. And again, it goes back to the comment that much of this seems to be written on for an organization that operates on a calendar year. But it talks about under 420R8, Roman numeral 1, each pooled risk management program shall file with the commissioner on March 1 to report March 1, a report verified by an appropriate official of the program. And then it talks about financial statements. It seems really late to me to do something at March 1 if your fiscal year ends at June 30th. I think the intent of this is for an entity that has a calendar year program.
So you would say it's better off that would be 90 days after their fiscal year. Okay, we'll let the department respond to that. Go ahead.
Under the same section, 420R8, Roman numeral 2, we talked about costs being added to the programs, and I just found this one particularly interesting, that it may prescribe a uniform accounting system. And so to me, that when I see that, I wonder what that raises the question, is that uniform accounting software system? Because we all operate under government accounting standards, FASB, so I'm not sure what that
Clarify that
is.
for us.
Okay. Next page on mine, section 420R11, excess insurance. Each pooled risk management program shall seek to maintain aggregate excess insurance. That's interesting. Typically, you would want to have specific excess insurance. Specific is on individuals for high costs. We, as an organization, because of our size, once you get to be a certain size, aggregate isn't really applicable to you. We dropped aggregate a long time ago. So that seems quite unusual to me.
I'm sure they can explain that one.
Uh, 420R13, examination, Roman numeral 1, last sentence. Again, I just want to be sure to bring to everyone's attention that today administrative examinations are conducted by the Secretary of State's office through the Bureau of Securities regulation. And those examinations today are conducted at no expense to the program. Under this statute proposed, we do see that all examinations shall be conducted at the expense of the program. And I think it would be important to understand what the average cost of an examination is.
So this is R14 you're wondering about.
R13, 420, R13, examination,
Oh, exam.
Roman numeral 1, last sentence in Roman numeral 1.
Expense of the program. Okay. Okay.
This is more just, I'll say, a question that I'm been pondering and I don't have the answer to, but again, trying to continue to unpack all of this. 420 R21, confidentiality. Roman numeral 1. Notwithstanding any provision of the law to the contrary, any information of any pooled risk management program formed or affirmed under this chapter pertaining to claims analysis or claims management shall be privileged and confidential and not subject to disclosure to any third party. I wonder, again, I'm not an attorney, but I wonder about whether how applicable and how this can stand up, seeing as it's been deemed by the Supreme Court, New Hampshire Supreme Court, that we are all public entities subject to 91A. And I would think that some of this information, this may be broad sweeping, is actually public information under the right to know.
So this one I know a little bit about.
Okay.
Okay. So is what we used to call the McDonald's, the secret formula. So that each insurance company, and now we'll talk about now insurance companies, okay, different from who you are, has, when they come up with their actuarials, they come up with their analysis on how they determine what they're going to charge, okay? And that if they're going to use certain criteria as one, and the most famous one we had in this committee was property and casualty using credit reports. And so that the issue was, and we ended up resolving the issue by using the word solely, that they couldn't solely use credit reports. But the key information, the key knowledge that I gained, and what this committee would gain over the years, was that if they're going to use a certain criteria, that you're going to use a certain methodology, you're going to do some process in which you are going to say, this is how we determine what the fee is going to be, what the premium is going to be, you have to document that. You have to show evidence that that assumption, credit reports is an example, that you have to show that that credit reports really has something to do with somebody is a high risk or not. Okay, so in that case, no insurance company wants the insurance department to be telling any other insurance company or anybody else what they were doing, what was thinking, what was on their mind. So in this case, what this paragraph is about is that whatever you do, I'm sure maybe you really feel right to know that anybody could find out exactly how you came up with the premium, and that you have to fully disclose everything you did. Okay, but in this case, all this paragraph is saying is that you have the right to not tell your competitor what you're doing.
Understand. I just think it's important that there is some interplay with the right to know that isn't taken into account here.
Got it.
And then just in final closing, I would just say that it appears that the same level of lack of involving the public entity risk pools, at least our public entity risk pool was not at all involved in this process, is the same process that was stated took place in the Senate and pushed through very quickly. And I would just continue to urge the committee to take our time to work through these pieces. There are a number of items in here that we need to better understand before this moves forward.
And I cannot agree with you more. Normally, if something like this, and this is dramatic as this, would not happen in a short period of time. In this committee, we would usually have created a study committee, and we would have worked on it over at least a year and taken our time with it. That certainly is still an option. What we were told is that people want that the concern over Health Trust was so great that action needed to happen this year.
Understand.
Okay, so but if the wiser minds say is, boy, let's just take our time and do this right. We have no problems that we just turn this whole thing into a study committee and we can come up with it. But what we heard from the Secretary of State's office was that it was very important that we take action now. And what this committee has felt is that instead of taking action now using statutory, which obviously has a long-term effect, how do you make that work? And we really truly believe that this insurance model is the appropriate model so that it wouldn't need a year. It wouldn't need time to figure out how to process it. It would be enforceable and ready to go upon passage, the way the bill is written. So, but yes, if you want to convince people that we shouldn't pass anything this year and do a study committee, I'm absolutely good with that.
Thank you for your feedback. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Representative Teresa, you have a question for her?
I have a question and I have one comment too. So
Do you questioning her or you're questioning just the bill itself? Or we are
No,
building right now. We're building a
my
list of
first-
things
my-
that we're going to ask the insurance department to follow up on.
no, my first question is what we just discussed.
Okay.
So you mentioned, as we discussed yesterday, that this proposed amendment revolves around one of the point is that the risk pools are going to provide financial reports to the insurance department. Explain me, well, that will be a part of this amendment, but what if they don't follow, or what if they don't provide the report as proposed in this bill? Now, you kept talking just now that the Secretary of State basically addresses it by statutory. I heard that term a couple of times.
Licensure, it's licensure. We would,
No,
we would
versus-
yank, we
yeah.
would yank their license.
I know,
away
that's what I'm
if
coming
They were
to.
not in compliance.
Right. So explain the difference that the Secretary of State will address this using a statutory requirement versus the licensure under your model of insurance agency. Explain the difference how if a risk pool does not provide financial reports as needed under this amendment on time, how they are going to be treated differently, or how do we handle differently one statutory versus another under licensure model that you're proposing? Explain the difference.
Okay, so
Won't
what
they both
we'll-
go to the Attorney General
Well,
office?
I think the department understands that question. My answer would be is, actually the same thing as 5B is. And
So
that
there's no
is-
difference.
No, there is a difference, because the difference
explain.
would be is that under a licensure, and if we're going to start saying is, we're not going to renew your license because you failed to give us these reports, right? You failed to do these things that we want them to do. That's your thesis, right? What happens if the entity doesn't do what it's supposed to do?
Which is what is the problem basically
Okay.
in the past.
And so we're not really in the past. We're dealing with the licensure and the process, and that they are required to file these reports.
Yes.
Okay.
And if they
So
don't follow
let's
it,
just use that as the model here. Okay. They're not filing their reports. They refuse to give the department this information.
yes.
Okay, so what would happen is, and this is my guess, and we can have the department follow up, but I like to, put it in layman's terms, okay? And that is, what it happens is, if they would be told they need to give us the report, and they would say, no, we're not going to give it to them. They'll give them some lame excuse, or they'll have whatever reason. They'll
whatever.
do whatever they not do, okay? So basically, the department would say is, okay, now you're in default of your license.
Okay.
Okay, and so that we're going to now order you to cease to exist. Okay, now, regardless if it's the insurance department or the Secretary of State's office, in either case, if one or the other says we're going to shut you down,
It'll go to Attorney General office.
it would still go to Superior Court.
So it's the same thing.
In that sense, it's the same thing. The difference being is that the Department of Insurance will then have to demonstrate what different issues that cause them not to renew their license. When it comes to RSA 5, RSA 5 only has a limited number of different issues. So they're going to just simply say they refuse to do this get through this financial threshold that we required. Okay, and so therefore it's much more a developed process of terms of that risk pool in developing why they should be shut down.
So like you said, the details probably the insurance department will provide on that. I would like to hear the same thing from someone from the Secretary of State office, that what difference is going to be if the reports are not filed on time as requested from both the departments, to understand the difference.
Fair enough. Okay, that's great. I like that.
And the second thing-
narrows it down to a simple subject. You're done. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so to address that real quickly, since it's fresh in everyone's minds, you're correct. We have a licensure requirement. So if they are not complying with the statute as written, we would be able to deny them a license. And that's an administrative process. If they don't like the decision, they can request a hearing with the department. The commissioner would make a final decision, and that decision is then appealable to the Supreme Court. There is not an ability to go to Superior Court
No,
under
okay,
our
excuse me. You go
system.
right to Supreme Court. Okay.
Yes,
So,
but
even
it's
better.
an administrative process, and it's the same process we use for all of our licensure requirements for all of the different entities, adjusters, and producers. So it's a very established process. To go
Okay.
back to this, I think there's some key things.
Yes.
So I think the producer piece, if you look on page 5,
Yep.
starting on line 10, the paragraph says a person other than a pooled risk management program. So it's exempting out that requirement, but making clear that, excuse excuse me, if anyone other than a pool risk program were trying to sell, solicit, or negotiate this type of coverage, they would need to be licensed as a producer. And that's, the producers are the ones that sell insurance. And we want to make sure that whoever is doing that business understands what they're talking about. And if they're doing something inappropriate, we're able to take regulatory action against that. It would not prohibit the pooled risk management program from doing any of those things. They are part of that exemption.
Okay.
Going,
To page 2. Should
Oh.
should I do that?
Yeah.
There was concern about language at the bottom of page 2.
Right, the commingling.
Yeah, that's quoted word for word from RSA 5B. So that's in the law today. So,
That's word for word from 5B now.
yes.
Okay, guess she doesn't even know what's under her current law.
which is also
So-
implied in the name pooled risk, is you're pooling risks. There would be
Yeah.
commingling of funds.
Okay, so do we, at the end of the day, are we gonna have any potential of that scandal occurring again when that pooling problem that occurred?
That's how these entities work, is that these different groups are banding together to pool their risks.
Right,
And generally, that would be the business of insurance, and you have to be an insurance company to do that. But because these are self-funded government entities, there's this exemption process. so
right,
that
but
you
her
have to be-
reference was to when they were pooling products.
Yeah,
But-
Products are a little bit different because they have different risks associated with it, but that's part of what this
you
structure.
can't really do it. That's why we put in the two sections about one entity acquiring another and more than one entity is existing as a part of a holding company structure.
Right.
That's so that we can keep the lines
Okay,
between
so
them.
we are
keep-
narrowing it down to the actual,
Yeah, so that there can
health-
be
this is
like
just
no
health then. That-
unfair
right.
transference of assets from one entity to another.
okay, all right?
The excess loss insurance, the reason we put it as aggregate is that's the most important form of excess loss. It's if your total losses in aggregate exceed a certain number, then your excess coverage kicks in. So it's equivalent to having a deposit. So that's why it's worded excess or a deposit. We're not so interested in as a matter of preserving solvency in what specific levels of coverage they have.
And there is flexibility there. It says unless the commissioner determines a lesser amount would be adequate. So if the commissioner finds that, given their reserves and, the way the program's set up, they don't need excess loss, that would be an option on the table.
Right, a lot of the some of the larger programs might not need it.
Also, with respect to the timing for approval of rates in the financial reporting,
Yes,
approval, there is no time period specified there. So whenever they get around to their process of setting their rates, they would just need to file it with us so that we could do that analysis to make sure that the rates are adequate to cover anticipated losses. And that's the whole point of this, and ensuring financial solvency. With the financial reporting, that March 1 date is standard across the board, and that has to do with the way we do our financial analysis in-house. All entities are required to submit their financial reports by March 1. A lot of those entities are on different fiscal years, and that doesn't necessarily matter. It's because they're submitting the last financial report they have from the previous.
so if someone who was doing June 30th,
Yes,
and,
They could still
and
report
they
this
could,
way.
they could file it in September,
yes,
and, but by the time it comes to March 1st, you would say is, we already got your filing
yes.
back in September.
Yes, and that has to
Okay.
do with the department's workflow. They're doing the financial analysis for all entities on a specific schedule, and some of them are looking at quarterly, some of them are looking at them on a
Right.
year-wide. That's why we want to make sure we have all of the necessary reports by March 1. But that could be a report from, within the last year.
It's right, the report is going to be, so if their financials ended, April 30th, then now they're in a pickle because they got to get it done in one day. But if their financials ended in May 30th, they have a whole year to
Mhm.
Yeah, and
technically file
And I believe
to
these
make
are
that March 1st
audited,
date.
correct? The reports.
The audited financials, yeah.
Yeah, so even if your fiscal year ended till June, you would still need some time to close out everything from the last fiscal year
Anyways,
to do
right.
that audit. So,
Right.
usually it's whatever the reporting is from the last year. And since
That's
you're
what
doing
that's
it
what
on
I'm
the
saying.
annual
I
basis, yeah.
understand it's the last year. Yeah.
And then when we're
So-
talking about the accounting principles, generally for insurance products, they don't use GAAP accounting. We use statutory accountings, and that has to do with the way you collect a premium and accrue claims. It's a better methodology, and that's pretty standard in the field to use statutory accounting. So that's why we would want.
But we
that
did, I mean,
ability.
part of the purpose of adding this was to give us some flexibility to provide guidance to pooled risk
That's the
management programs.
using the word uniform rather than.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So theoretically, you could do some research and see what other states do for
Yep.
risk pools.
yeah, that's
And
different.
if you
from
see a model
statutory. Yeah.
that works, then you might
Right.
choose that one.
Then there was a mention of RSA, I mean, 420R21 about confidentiality. That language was taken word for word from RSA 5B. So wherever we could, we tried to preserve the language of RSA 5B.
And that's also important when you're talking about some of these smaller groups. When you're trying to project out what your claims are, you're looking at your past history. And if you're looking at actual claims incurred, in a small community, if one or two people have a high volume of claims because of a specific condition, it could be easy to identify who those people are, and we always want to make sure to protect their health information. So depending on the size of the pool, you need to have those confidentiality provisions in place.
And overall, I would like to say it was a painful exercise to need to put this together so quickly without having the opportunity to get input from the regulated entities. That is by far
Very
the
unusual for us to
preferred
do that. Yeah.
method. And I have, heard some things that give me ideas about, tweaks that could be made to make it even better. But we were just under the gun. We
Right.
wanted to get input, but we couldn't.
Right. And then the question I've heard from some people that are you guys seriously interested in doing this? Is this something that the department feels like they want to do it, or you feel like I'm just forcing this on you and you have no choice? But the issue was that because you say no we're neutral, it appears to some people that you don't want us to do this.
You're completely agnostic.
I understand.
Yeah.
So
We'll
can you?
do whatever the
Do you,
legislature
I
needs.
understand that.
That's
Can,
neutral.
can you give me something a little more warm fuzzy to say is that we certainly appreciate why the committee would consider us to be doing this, and that we think that we're clearly qualified and capable of doing an excellent job with this, and the department is geared and ready to go and can make it happen.
Well, yes. We were honored to be considered in this way and to hear many witnesses say that the insurance department has the expertise and the long history, and that there was a certain amount of appreciation of those comments. And we're not seeking to avoid this at all, and we do feel very capable of serving as the regulator and doing a good job.
Great, thank you. Okay, we do have questions from the committees.
Yeah.
So I'll start with Representative Sharice.
So I want to follow up what you said to the question that I asked you before. You do understand that risk pools are public entities, and I know that Department of Insurance, they have very good expertise dealing with private insurances, which are for-profit organizations. Do you feel that the licensure requirement that you're enforcing or going to enforce, and in case if it doesn't get enforced, you just said that it'll go to Supreme Court. do you think the handling the license requirement for a private organization like insurance companies is a similar thing than dealing with the risk pools in case of failure on their part? Do you feel the same expertise can work both ways, in both cases?
Yeah, it would work. It would work similarly. You know, for example, in the example that you gave of an entity that failed to file their financial reports, what we would do in reality, we wouldn't use the sledgehammer tool of yanking someone's license. We would more likely place a restriction on the license. For example, servicing existing business only, you can't write any new business until we get your financial report. That's a gentler tool that we use, that we would normally use.
You also understand that you're dealing with political subdivisions in this case.
Yes, I understand that very well.
Okay. So you feel that the enforcement on both the cases, private insurance company versus public entities dealing with the political subdivisions, they require the similar expertise and similar requirements.
Yes, right. Same
Thank you.
tools.
Okay, Representative Gibbs.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of confidentiality, did I understand correctly that there is a concern that if the information were not kept confidential, that some personally identifiable information about people filing claims might be revealed?
That's the language that exists in RSA 5B, and my guess would be that that was part of the original reason for putting that in there, the protected health information, as well as possibly trade secret information.
Thank you.
Representative Miles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. My question will come in a second. Thank you to the Department of Insurance for the intense, detailed work you've done on this request from the committee. I still continue to see some very red flags with this amendment. The Secretary of State continues to want to oversee this risk pool. The Health Trust group is the only group here asking to be regulated under a different body. The other groups are not asking for that. And typically, when the commissioner, the insurance commissioner, really feels strongly about something, like taking over an entire regulating program, he would be here himself to say just that. So that concerns me that we haven't heard directly from the commissioner of insurance, Mr. Betancourt, that he wants to take this over. And so my question would be, if we were to proceed with this, perhaps an amendment to delay the date of transfer and relook at it in 2027 before the transfer actually would occur could be looked at and addressed.
We could change the effective date, that's true.
I just want to clarify that, you know, we were asked to put together an amendment.
I
as we took
understand.
this over, and we're in the position to do whatever the legislature and the governor decide. We
Yes.
really take no position on this, and that's for the policymakers to make that decision.
And I think that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
I have not heard that this is something that the Department of Insurance really wants. And I have heard that the Secretary of State wants to keep it. And the only people I've heard really begging to get out from under the Secretary of State's purview is Health Trust, who themselves are the reason we're all here. Their own internal errors.
No, we're here because two other went bankrupt.
But currently,
Two others went bankrupt
currently we were addressing the Health Trust issue.
because they're the only ones left.
I have a
Representative Priscilla.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your hard work in a short period of time. My question is about order of magnitude. So what are the size, scope of these risk pooled entities that you would be now requested to monitor? Can you give us an understanding of, do you know how many you would be now asked to regulate? I don't know if it's just the ones we've been talking about, or if it's like, for example, the city of Manchester that does their own risk pool management. Would that also be included? Thank you.
So I don't know. My guess, based off of some of the testimony we've heard, is maybe like a handful. If a city is doing their own self-funding and not pooling it with any other entities, then they are truly self-funded and they would not fall under
They would be ERISA.
this legislation.
They would be federally ERISA.
So there are only truly a handful.
There's only a handful. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go around. Everybody. All right.
Second round.
All
So
right.
I just want to follow up because Health Trust name just came in one of the discussion that we had, and I just learned that Health Trust is the one who wants to come under Department of Insurance. Just heard that. The question is that has the board of directors approved the notion of transferring from Secretary of State to Department of Insurance? And that question will be for if there's somebody from Health Trust who can answer the question. Have they approved it?
Yes, the answer is yes. You can answer it, but no, they have not. Because how could they approve something until they've seen what the legislation looks like?
So the request came just verbally?
This was. I'll have to be frank. This was blaming on me.
I'm sorry?
I mean, blame it on me. I don't. Everyone who says that it was their idea of putting it on the insurance department. No, this was my idea. And,
Oh, I
and
thought-
it goes back.
I
It
thought
goes
Health
back
Trust,
to 2010 when I first became aware of risk pools.
Okay.
And at that time, as a member of this committee,
Okay.
I was not chairman at the time.
So that's contrary to what I've been hearing so far. So far I
I
heard
know,
that
like everybody wants
Health Trust wants to
blame-
come.
Yeah.
But that's not correct then.
That is not correct. And I would say that in terms of before I made this decision, I did talk to a lobbyist who was involved with one of the companies that went out of business, and excuse me, risk pool that went out of business.
NHIT?
And without mentioning names,
Okay.
I said to him, I've always thought this should be under the insurance department and not on the Secretary of State's office. And he said, well, that would have been the right decision.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that because I have an assumption that Health Trust contacted or they want to move to Department of Insurance. So thanks for clarifying that.
I actually was really ironic to the lobbyist. I didn't even realize who he was, and wasn't until later on that he was involved in this issue. So I would have to say that if you want to blame anybody for this idea of insurance, it's me. You can blame me. Representative Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't here yesterday, so I apologize if this was covered yesterday.
Yep.
But reading the letters that you forwarded to the committee, it seemed that there had been some fairly serious failures of communication between Health Trust and the Secretary of State's office. So was that part of the reason for the decision to transfer to the insurance department?
In terms of for me, no. I'll say it off record what I felt about the relationship between the two. I don't really want to share that publicly right now, but I will tell you off record. But no, it was, to me, it was that the Secretary of State's office said that they needed more statutory authority, that whatever we did back there in 2010 wasn't good enough, and they needed more. And when I said, wait a second now, I didn't even agree with that way back when we passed it. I'm on record, researched it. I'm on record. I absolutely voted against it. So when it came to this coming back and the sense of urgency, and so we really got to do this now, because like I say, I would normally have said I would have retained the bill. I would take the Senate bill and I would have retained it and had this committee work on it. and spend a lot more time on it. So, and frankly, that option is still available.
So,
We could still retain this bill, but we were told that this was at a critical point. This needed to be taken care of. That the issues were right at hand, and that's how sort of my hand was forced to try to come up with this legislation. Representative Miles,
Conversational, or does it have to be in the form of a question?
this is subcommittee, so you can say whatever you want, and you can be looking at me and when you say it, or
Okay.
look at somebody else.
Thank you.
Right? This is subcommittee.
Thank you. I still have not heard anything different from the Department of Insurance plans that the Secretary of State's recommended legislation with Carson's amendment. I haven't heard that they're going to do anything different than that. So I just
Okay.
can't imagine moving an entire huge process from one regulator to another to fix the problems that are fixed in the original legislation.
Okay, so yes, you heard it from me, and that what's the dramatic change, why we're doing this dramatic change, is how we are regulating them. Okay, the difference between the Secretary of State's office and the Department of Insurance is, as I just described, it's about
licensure
the
versus
rule of licensure. Okay, it is a different
Statutory.
way of regulating entities. Okay, now the Secretary of State's office is statutory, and one of the things I'll never forget from Bill Gardner, and it probably goes back to that 2010, but I think it was even before that he made it clear that the Secretary of State's office doesn't make rules. They don't do rules. Why? Well, because they're a constitutional office. It's separate. They're not under the guise of the legislature. Okay? They're theoretically outside of us. What we have, the only control we have is what the statutory requirements that we give them. This debate also came up when it was the decision to move securities, which was a division all of its own, and moved it under the Secretary of State's office. Okay, this debate occurred at that time, and I do believe that securities does have rulemaking. Okay, but that was because it's not directly controlled by the Secretary. I don't know what the rationale how they got there, but at the end of the day, it's a different way of being the I should say the oversee of the statute. Here's the key thing, and this goes back to Louis Bergeron, who was the insurance commissioner way back when, okay? And that the idea was that risk pools did not need any regulation. They don't need it. They're self-governing. They're cities and towns. And cities and towns, at the end of the day, all we did was give them that enabling legislation so that they could do that. They could have this entity and work with themselves, but that nobody, when it was passed back in 87, nobody talked about reserves. Nobody talked about whether reserves are too high or too low or what the premiums were. None of these issues, because they were autonomous. It was on their own. Okay? And it was only in 2010 where the issue came up was that the reserves were too high. Now, and back then, I said, well, this should be insurance. And everybody said, well, all right, John, keep it to yourself. Because look, this is about having too much money. Okay? So don't get involved. Okay? Now, we have the complete opposite. Now we have the solvency issue. And that is when it was a no-brainer to me to say this should be done by the insurance department because they're the ones that have the expertise on solvency. And in terms of Betancourt, yes, he has let me clearly know that he is in support of this legislation, but that he, like the department, are playing agnostic and not saying that, we really... that they're doing it because we, the legislature, just like we passed laws related to the Secretary of State's law, they were passing laws related to them, and they'll take on that task. Representative Hammond is next.
Thank you. I'm just watching our emails here. We got an email from someone on the Board of Health Trust, and I won't read the whole email, but he's claiming that Health Trust staff is lobbying this committee to move the authority from Secretary of State to the Insurance Department. He says that they're going rogue and they're not doing it at the direction of the Board of Health Trust. So just an interesting little.
There you go. So
wrinkle
Health
there.
Trust is not necessarily on the same page. They might not think this is such a good idea. Okay. Representative Spear.
In describing the differences between the Secretary of State's implementation and the Insurance Department's implementation, the big thing we haven't mentioned is risk. Who owns the risk? And Health Trust is totally owning their risk, has always owned the risk, but the new implementation of the Secretary of State's bill, you know, the one that we saw, says the towns own the risk. That forces Health Trust to become a different entity than what they've been for 40 years. So that alone is a good reason, in my mind, to move over to the insurance implementation, which lets them do the business that they were born to do. So we haven't talked about risk, but I think that's very crucial to the discussion as to why it should move underneath the insurance company, because that lets them own the risk, not the towns. And the towns have said several times, they cannot operate their budgets if they own the risk. Their budgets will not be flat, and especially small companies, small towns won't have the ability to deal with it. These assessments that come up and might come up very unexpectedly, like what happened after COVID. So I think that that's an important part of the discussion. I just wanted to get that out there.
Fair enough.
And-
Okay. Is this the last question or you got more?
No, there are a couple. So, first of all, I'm not okay. Before I ask a question, first of all, I'm not very comfortable the way we are proceeding, saying this in amendment, because based on my experience so far, an amendment is where you change some small part or, put some modification.
In the legislature,
but
amendment
this
means we're
hold on.
changing a bill.
Yeah, but here, actually, we are entirely changing the very crux of the bill itself, that the main factor is moving from Secretary of State, which the Bill 297 says, to Insurance Department, which you just call an amendment. I feel that if really we are reinventing the wheel all over again and putting new set of guardrails, which I didn't really find difference so far, but if you say it's new or different, then you should actually call it a different bill so that people can vote on both the original bill and the new bill. Because my fear is that once we pass the amendment, in that case, the original bill will be lost. So there won't be any discussion on Secretary of State retaining the purview to manage the risk pools.
Yeah. Well, I realize this
I
is
don't want that to happen.
I hear. I got you. Okay. This is your first term. Okay. I want you to know a couple of ground rules we have here in the legislature, and that is, it is absolutely within the purview of a committee to take a bill and throw everything out of that bill, put in something completely different, and lo and behold, by the time it hits the House floor, it will have a new title. Okay? Legislative Services would do that. We have that process. We have done that. It's been doing that a long time. In this case, I'm not sure if I look at the title of the bill, it says relative to pool risk management programs. As far as I'm concerned, that title is staying right with it. We haven't. Program is program. It doesn't say who's the regulator in its title. So I understand your feeling about what we're doing here, how radical it is, and it sounds like what you want to do is retain this bill. Then
No,
so you think we should?
Since you have a
retain
lot of
it?
expertise in this area, all I want is that, we can discuss and we can vote on your proposed new bill.
Amendment.
I mean, call amendment, whatever you want to call. But
amendment.
I also want vote on the original bill of 297 from the Senate. And in that case, so that it can go on the floor and we can discuss about it. I don't want it to get lost in this subcommittee and this committee.
So that defeats
But once
the.
you vote amendment, this original bill will be lost.
So that defeats the committee rule.
Say it again.
That defeats the purpose of a committee. The purpose of a committee is to take an amendment and make a recommendation, take a bill and make a recommendation to the full House. That's our job, is to make a recommendation, right? The committee vote, when we vote, we're voting to accept, on the committee recommendation or any expedient to legislate, whatever the committee's recommendation is, that's what we're voting on. So it is the obligation of the committee to do whatever it wants with this bill, amend it, change it, dump the whole thing and put something else into it. It can do anything, okay? But at the end of the day, the first vote on the House floor is going to be the committee's recommendation.
I think he's asking about the subcommittee vote on the amendment.
Okay. So I thought he said
No, ultimately
put it on
go
the
to
whole
committee.
floor. He wanted the whole thing to go to the whole floor. He wanted the original bill, the Senate bill, to go to the whole floor.
Yes.
Is that without the amendment that that Senator Carson sent over with it? Do you
No,
want
you
that
can put
amendment
them
on
in-
it too?
No, you can put them. All I'm saying that you are fundamentally changing the bill to pass the, direction from Secretary of State to
Okay.
Insurance Department. That's a fundamental change.
Okay.
It's not amendment. That's all I'm saying.
I get it. So I just want to let you know that that's just
Am I
not the
correct?
way we work.
Am I correct that we can't put out two recommendations, one for the original bill and one for the amended bill? We only have to put out one recommendation.
Exactly. So the normal process would be is if you think that the original bill is the right answer, okay,
Yes.
you would then vote against the committee's recommendation when the committee votes,
Okay.
and then you will file a minority report with ought to pass on
The original bill.
on the original bill. Okay.
Okay.
That would be your motion. Okay. But yes, it is true. We would only take that up if the initial vote, the recommendation of the committee, fails. So you would still have to turn down whatever comes out of this committee first. Then you can take up the original bill in its current form. And I assume you also want the amendment, but maybe I shouldn't be bothered telling you that it has that they already know that they have a problem with that original bill, that it needs to be amended anyways.
Okay.
So, Representative Miles, we can talk about this
Okay, that's
offline.
fine. Thank you.
Okay, we can talk about this more offline. Representative Miles.
You can tell me if this is not the appropriate time, but so I'm still wondering about an additional amendment that would delay the transfer. If we pass it, we would delay the transfer so that we can relook at it just before the institution date in 2027. And then for the current crisis, could we set a trigger amount for the reserves for the current crisis? So like two parts, addressing two parts, and I defer to you to translate that into something legislative, but it's just the thought how to deal with the current crisis with a trigger amount, and then also relook at this again before the final transfer to the DOI in 2027.
My reading of the current bill is not necessarily a short-term solution. It's actually a long-term solution. It's a long-term impact. And that I understand where you're coming from, what you're trying to do, but it really is there's nothing in it as a short-term solution to get us over the hump so that we can reconsider all of this. And it was really, frankly, it was either, no matter what in terms of going forward, how we're doing this, the Health Trust is fully committed to getting their reserves back up. All right, there's no evidence, or no one's been that they're continuing their bad ways. Okay,
But what's preventing them from getting their reserves up?
nothing.
Continuing
Nothing's
under
preventing
the
them. I was gonna
current
say,
process.
we don't have to do anything. That's why we could just go ahead and retain the bill. We just retain it and then see, and come September, we can see how their progress and whether they're making progress. And we can some point in time say, having that constructive conversation, whether we should have a multi-regulator or whether whether the current, works right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, Representative Herbert.
I would like to have the OID and the other entity sit down and go through them, because what you did an hour ago.
Right.
uh,
Yeah, I was
put
going to
it-
look to the Secretary of State's office to see if they would like to
and
answer
that-
some of these
and
questions.
To me, that sounds like you retained the bill. Okay, so then you can get the knobs out, and you'll still have the recourse of the citizenry have something to say about this stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you weren't. It's not the Secretary of State's office. You want to hear more from.
I want to
From the
hear
cities and towns?
whatever solves the problem for the people, the citizens of
Well, they
this outfit.
don't know. That's the problem. They're looking to us to figure that problem out. They're not. They have no idea the extent of the problem and where the problem is. They're no different than we are with reading the newspaper. Because you have to remember, these entities, their board members are members of their community. They are the people. So
No, I
if the
understand
issue is the way they're operating is inappropriate, then what you're hearing from the Secretary of State's office is that model is not working. And that's why we need to have stricter, higher thresholds, because they're not doing a good job managing themselves.
Well, I don't know. I thought that couple right there yesterday.
She works for another risk pool.
Okay, well,
And are you from a city in town? Do you work, or you just work directly for the risk pool? Right. She just works for the entity. But we do have a hand up, and you work for a city in town? Okay, Representative Herbert, I'd like to hear from you. Okay. No, do we need to speak to the mic? Sorry. And you introduce yourself because. Yep, now it's on.
My name is Tara Tucker. I'm the Chief of Police of Greenland. I'm also a member and representing the New Hampshire Area Chiefs of Police. And I've listened to all the testimony, and there's lots of good points, and there's lots of discussion about the actuaries, which is well above my head. But I can tell you, the reason that I started following this bill is, as drafted out of the Senate, the 297. As a town, we cannot do that. We don't have a flexibility of budget to be able to do what is required of us in that bill. It says we have to retain a certain amount, and if the claims go above that, then within that year, we have to bring our reserves up. I don't know how any town budget can do that. Perhaps Manchester or someone can do that, but we definitely can't. More than 80%, I don't know all your areas, but more than 80% of New Hampshire are towns that are under 5,000 people. We have 24 people that are employees in the health trust. So if we don't have the health trust, or if it ends up being this other type of situation under the Secretary of State that they proposed, we have to go out on the free market. And I don't think you guys are much more insurance savvy than I am, but I can tell you 24 people, we're not getting any deal. We are not going to be able to afford that. Yesterday, there was discussion about how there could be an increase in rates if it goes under the Department of Insurance, and that would get passed down to the taxpayers. If you want to talk about getting passed down to the taxpayers, see 24 people go out on the free market and try and get Anthem insurance. It is going to be so expensive that we won't be able to do it. We're talking over the last 2-3 years about how difficult it is to hire in general. Now let's go to emergency services, and it's 10 times worse. If you take away the insurance or make it lesser or make it so the taxpayers can't afford it, we are going to have such a difficult time trying to hire. This isn't, I don't understand the background of Secretary of State and Health Trust, and I don't know if there's bad blood or other things going on that I don't know about. But if we're honest about making sure that our public employees are covered responsibly and kept in check, then we need the oversight of someone. I don't care what the name of the entity is that oversees, but there needs to be oversight and an accepted actuarial way that they do it, and it needs to be a solid risk pool. And Health Trust, for my 28 years in this state, has been that for us. We work with Primex. They are excellent. Hearing, I didn't know about school care, but hearing her say, we do this with the board of directors. We make sure that our members know this and this and this. Health Trust does that for us. And I feel so happy and glad that they do that, but it's not regulated that they have to do that. It sounds like going under the Department of Insurance, there's a lot more guidelines. And if you have licensure or if you have rulemaking ability, it makes sure that they stay solvent and your public employees stay covered. I just want to make sure whatever entity it is, it's something that we can do. And if it's SB 297 as it was written, I don't know how.
Right. Well, to be fair, they do have an amendment to try to address
Okay.
that problem.
All right. But that's, it's very important that the risk lies with the risk pool, because 24 people don't pull any weight. And that's the majority of our state, which is what what we love about it, right? So what Representative Spire said is absolutely true when it matters where the rubber meets the road, and it's important.
Thank you
So,
for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank
Was-
you.
was
Thank you very
there-
much.
Chair,
You willing to take
I
questions?
want to hear
Yes.
that
Yes.
testimony of the couple, the two that talked about how they were going to deal. Yeah, I want to hear him again, okay? And then you can do whatever you want. But the fact is,
Okay.
Thank
I'm
you.
not quite. I think he has some good ideas, and I'd like to hear them again.
So, Representative Gibbs, you had your hand up. You have a question or?
Not a question, and
Comment?
maybe we should let Representative Herbert finish. And I have a comment to make, but I can make it after
Okay.
after he's done.
Fair enough. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. Scott DeRoche, Executive Director of Health Trust. If I'm happy to answer any and all questions, and I know I've been accused of being too technical and over talking in the past. I think it's important to put simply that there is a difference between 297 and this, not just in regulator. And this relates to all of the conversation, including the board discussion. Importantly, we today as an organization hold the risk from our entities. They are only responsible to pay their fixed premium, which is extremely important in a municipal and school budget environment. We need ample reserves to be able to do that. SB 297, as passed by the Senate, explicitly does not allow our model to exist. The board has seen that, has reviewed it, voted to issue a statement that we would no longer issue coverage effective 12/31 of this year for January groups, 6/30 of 26 for July groups, if it's passed as written, because our model is not allowed to operate under that. That would be imprudent. We would be trying to take on risk without the proper reserves to do so when it's explicitly not allowed. The amendment allows multiple types of models of risk pools to exist. one where the risk is transferred, some of the risk is transferred, all of the risk is transferred, none of the risk is transferred. Because there's an entire ecosystem available of types of risk pools that operate both in New Hampshire and throughout the country. And so our model of risk pool, where we would hold the risk, have what's called a non-assessable policy, would be allowed to exist under the amendment before you with the insurance department, and would have the proper reserves up to 600% of the authorized control level through the RBC model to be able to operate. And yes, with transparency and reporting, it would allow that model to exist. So there was a question as to if there's been a discussion of the board about transferring regulation, moving away from the Secretary of State, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the discussion. The discussion is, can we continue to operate and fulfill a need for the public sector? Are our services both viable and valuable? And the board voted that under 297 as written, it is neither valuable or viable for the public sector. Our type of model would have to exit. Other models may continue to be able to exist because there are models of risk pools that are able to do that. Under the insurance department amendment, agnostic of who the regulator is, it allows our type of coverage to exist. So in other words, there would not be any surprise assessments that occur during the year, unbudgeted amounts, surprise rate increases, things along those lines. And that's a critical difference when comparing the bills. And that's been the discussion amongst our board. Our board chair was aware of this amendment when it came through. As we know, stakeholders were not necessarily involved as much as we would love throughout this process, and we would love to have the opportunity to collaborate further. But when the bill came, we went through the provisions with the chair of the board of directors, and he immediately saw that this would allow our model of risk pool to continue to exist, and therefore was supportive of me testifying in support to this committee. So I just wanted to be clear about that point. We exist not for ourselves. We're here to serve the public sector, as all risk pools are. We're nonprofit entities. We're here to serve the towns, the schools, the taxpayers, the counties, those covered individuals that work there and their family members. Whatever is put into place needs to be valuable for them. They need stability, not surprise fees. They need coverage that they can count on. And one bill explicitly doesn't allow that to exist, with low reserve levels and requirements for assessments, and the other allows for it to exist. That's the main support, is the system, as opposed to a choice of regulator.
Okay, further questions, Representative Priscilla? Okay. Okay. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. With all due respect, you're the reason why we're here. So I would like to understand, I'm not talking about the regulatory body,
Sure.
because either way, you need to be solvent regardless of who's regulating. So if we explored retaining so that we could work on this a little bit more, I would like to know if you're in a position that you are going to demonstrate solvency so that if we retain the bill and we work on it a little more, how can you ensure us that you are on the path to solvency?
So we are solvent today, just to be clear, and our financials are open. We're happy to have discussions with any individuals. What occurred, and I will be brief, but what occurred was a result of COVID and exactly what we're talking about, reserve levels. And so during COVID, when care was repressed, it wasn't as easily accessible, there was a surplus that was built up. Under current law, that surplus was required to be returned. We returned $57 million as required to the public sector. The 2 years after, there was a significant return to care that wasn't just delayed care, it was much worse because cancer wasn't diagnosed on time, so now it's a later stage, it's more costly to treat, et cetera, et cetera. And so during that time, that 2-year period, our reserves were correctly utilized to cover those claims costs. That brought us to a low position 2 years back, and the board adopted a multi-year rebuild plan to rebuild reserves. And so the first year of that rebuild plan, we had $10 million of reserves that were rebuilt. This year to date, we're over $10 million that are built. our milestone is on track to be met for the end of this fiscal year. We are well above any 4% provision that triggers the assessment, et cetera, that is in 297. That is not an issue today. There's this concept as to whether you have a premium deficiency reserve. Are your rates covering your claims, or are you knowing that your rates are not covering your claims and you need to book an additional liability for that? That is not the case for us. We have no premium deficiency reserve. Our rates are covering our claims plus the appropriate rebuild. To give you another example of it, if 297, and I know there's some future dates, if it were in effect today, it would say that we would need to rebuild from about 7.5%, 8% of contributions up to a minimum of 5% in the next, 12% in the next rating cycle. So about a 5% capital risk charge. That's exactly what our board has in place and has put in place as part of this rebuild. They actually accelerated it to a 5.3% as of last year. So we are appropriately rebuilding. We are solvent. The question is, how high can we rebuild to? And that's what's challenging there in this process, because there's so much discussion about reserve level assessment, et cetera, et cetera. We're trying to never get back into this position. We had to give back money, and now we have to raise it from the public sector quickly, and that's a challenge for everybody involved. If we were able to retain appropriate reserves, we would not be in this type of situation. And that is not a unique situation for us. Again, New Hampshire Interlocal Trust, I think, is a great example where they did give back millions of dollars a couple of years ago, and now they are closing and in a receivership. As risk-taking entities, it is important that either we have sufficient funds to handle the risk, or the risk is retained by the towns and school districts, and they need to be able to pay it through assessments when something doesn't go according to plan, right? And so this is really a discussion as to which model should be allowable, should multiple models be allowable, and this amendment allows that to exist, both in name by allowing accessible and non-accessible policies, also in reserve level by having up to 600% of the RBC, also even contemplating that additional backstops may be needed, such as guarantee funds and excess insurance or reinsurance, et cetera, et cetera. I think there was an article that was talked about by the insurance department yesterday by Milliman, who's the actuarial firm that we also use, of an entity that had a 900% RBC and just 2 years later was in a challenging position. The market is extremely volatile. And so the purpose is, as we navigate through that, as public sector entities navigate through that, should they be with a risk pool that is able to have proper reserves, or should it be in a system where the risk pool has lower reserves, and if things don't go as expected, bills and assessments are sent to the districts? So to answer your question, yes, we are solvent today. The times that were talked about were 2 years ago when we booked a year-end entry as of 7/1/2023. That was our lowest point. We have rebuilt and are very much on track with that rebuild process.
And I have a quick follow-up. So
Quickie.
you want the way I understand it, you are recommending, I might use the wrong term, you're recommending a higher reserve than what is in the original amended Senate bill, is that correct? And I'm just curious as to why, in layman's terms.
Sure. So put succinctly, yes. So what is in the Senate bill as passed is a 12 to 16% of contributions with an authority of the Secretary of State to approve up to an 18% of contributions. Historically, we operated through it. It's a different capital adequacy reserve report. It's an actuarial study. There's a different methodology. It's 95% solvency over a 5-year period, et cetera, et cetera. It equated at the lowest end to about 19 to 20%, so that we're speaking apples to apples. That's what we operated on. That's what was in place immediately preceding COVID and during the COVID years. We were about 19% of contributions. And then coming out of COVID, in just 2 years, we went all the way down to below 5%. So that was a signal to us as a board that even at 19%, or closer to 20, it wasn't sufficient because in 2 years we were able to drop 15%. And so therefore the reserve would need to be higher. The board worked with our actuaries because they present us with a range, and they chose this time the middle of the range instead of the lowest end of the range. That middle of the range is equivalent to about 24% of premiums. And so the Senate bill as passed would limit us to 12 to 16. And again, if we were at the 16 and we had that same 15% loss, you can imagine, what would occur with triggers that if you get low, just bill your groups, just send them an invoice. The problem is the public sector can't pay that. We can't send to a town a significant invoice. If they're signed up for that and they understand they're in an accessible policy and that they're taking on that risk and they can properly fund it, such as some of the largest entities do in a true self-insured relationship, I know the city of Manchester has been brought up, then of course that can be a workable and viable model. It's not our model. It would not allow our model to exist, right? And so even the 18% is well below that 24. It would equate in the amendment to about a 550% RBC level, and the amended version allows for up to a 600% RBC level. So the range that we would like to target is allowable in the amended version. It certainly is not allowable in the Senate version, and explicitly doesn't allow our model to exist where risk is transferred.
Representative Miles.
Thank you for taking my question. I believe the I believe the original bill as amended by the Senate is a minimum, not a maximum set reserve, but that's not my question. So you're saying that you are solvent now, and you said that the primary driver of this big problem was COVID. Oh, is that correct? That's what you said?
The primary driver was the return to service after
Okay,
the
so-
COVID period of time.
Okay, so a once in a lifetime pandemic caused this problem. And so why is Health Trust lobbying so hard? If you said it doesn't matter who the regulator is, why is Health Trust lobbying so hard to get out from under the Secretary of State's purview? I can't understand it.
No, he was lobbying against the bill.
Yeah, to be
He's not.
clear,
He's not about who the regulator is. It was me who made this about the regulator. So if you want to blame the regulator, that's me.
Okay.
What he said is that it's just the fixation of this certain numbers wasn't fitting into their model and was a disservice to the cities and towns who were members.
But Health Trust can set their own reserves, and
to be
it's your own actuary's role with standards of the profession to manage that. It's a science. It's no one else's fault that you didn't have enough in reserves.
respectfully, I beg to differ. There's a system that is in place today where we are required to return surplus, and enforcement actions are threatened against us if we do not return surplus back to the communities. So when we had surplus, we did have to return it back to the communities. The Senate version does have an upper limit, which is our primary focus in opposition to it. The upper limit is that 16%. It does not allow us to exceed that, except for a provision to go up to 18% with specific approval, which is still not sufficient for us as an organization. And so we have had downward pressure and a focus on effectively undercapitalization with a focus on return of surplus for a number of years. That can work in the average year because claims are going to play out about as expected. But when claims don't play out as expected, we run 10,000 scenarios every single rating cycle. The actuaries run 10,000 rate years to look at what's occurring. When it doesn't work as expected, those reserves, if they're insufficient, can lead to very disastrous results. Our focus is on that reserve level and being able to have a viable model. I have not advocated for a move to the insurance department in any testimony that I've provided. I have focused on a system that is based on actuarial standards. In my true and honest opinion, the 12 to 16% is an arbitrary number that we have not been provided any backup reporting beyond a reference to one of our own reports that was misunderstood from prior years. We are advocating for an actuarially sound system. The RBC system is something that is used nationwide in every insurance department and has been proven and is sophisticated. All actuaries can use the RBC system. That is the focus. The original testimony I provided in the Senate was focused on allowing that range to be increased and to use a true actuarial system such as the RBC system. If that system were put into place under the current regulator, I would absolutely be supporting that as well, 100%.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Gibbs, you have a quickie? We're gonna get a little late in
Yeah,
the
this
time here.
this isn't a question.
Oh,
It-
this is
it-
a discussion. Okay.
Sorry?
This is discussion within the committee then?
Yeah, this is
You're-
this is a comment.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to comment in favor of the amendment rather than the original bill. Both based on my own evaluation, and I have to admit I'm far from being an expert on these issues, and also based on what we heard just now from Health Trust and from the Chief of Police, that it seems like the amendment would work a lot better. But also, I found SB 297 as it came to the committee really to be very confusing and lacking in clarity, whereas the amendment is quite clear. It's not confusing. I could understand it without being an expert in these areas, and therefore it seems to me that it would work better. And also, I hate to disagree with Representative Miles, but for those reasons, I would recommend that we deal with it this year and then it go into effect, if not immediately, at least promptly, not 2 years from now, but fairly promptly, because it seems like it would work better than what's in SB 297 and apparently would work better than the current system, regardless of who the regulator is.
Okay, so this is a good opportunity now to kind of wrap this conversation up, and let's get a consensus to where the committee is. So, Representative
question.
Reeses, right now, all we want you to tell us what you think we should do.
No, I have a quick question to clarify about the risk because I heard two different things. Rich,
We'll have to do it offline at this point.
Okay.
At this point, I want to wrap it up. So I'm going to assume that you think we should just pass the original bill 297, that you are opposed to this amendment. I'm assuming that, but are you opposed to this amendment?
yes, the amendment that the way it's drafted.
You are
of
opposed
course.
to this amendment. Okay.
Yes.
Representative Gibbs, you say you're in support of this amendment?
Yes.
Okay. Representative Miles? You don't, okay. Representative Herbert?
I support the amendment.
Okay.
I actually would like to discuss retaining it.
Well,
It's not an option?
Well, it is an option. So at this point, you might want to vote no on the amendment and then
To
take up
re-
the retaining motion.
Correct.
Okay. Representative Hammond?
Am I on this subcommittee?
No, but right now, my list is a little funky, so we're just going, who's in the room and what are people feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I'm leaning towards this amendment. We haven't heard from the Secretary of State yet. And just in the back of my mind, maybe this is not possible, but could there be some shared oversight between the Department of Insurance? They have the
Or
expertise.
the dual, the concept was the dual.
Yeah,
dual-
and having the Secretary of State still have some oversight. I see that if, let's say licensure is revoked, that's going to cause a political firestorm. And I think the Secretary of State is more equipped to deal with that type of firestorm from the towns saying, we're going to lose all our employees, right? That's going to erupt. And I think the Secretary of State might have a little more ability to deal with the municipalities. So I'm just throwing this out
Right,
there.
you're thinking,
A
what you're thinking.
recent
Right,
thought.
okay.
Maybe there's.
I would totally disagree between that, but
Utilize
that's the reason why I came up with the insurance, because I think the insurance
Yeah.
department is much more apt to deal
Can I
with
finish
it.
my thought?
Yeah.
utilize the expertise of the insurance department, but still retain some oversight through the Secretary of State's office. I haven't heard that discussed yet. I'm just throwing that out there. That's
Okay.
what I'm.
All right. John, do you have an opinion?
The amendment.
Okay.
I am going to go with Representative Ammon so that we can hear the Secretary of State.
Okay. Representative Spear, do you have an opinion?
Based on the fact that the Secretary of State's version of the bill, nothing personal, but I don't know what else to call it, doesn't handle risk the way I personally think it should. And the idea that these assessments are going back and forth to the towns, I don't know how anybody can manage that kind of a thing if it happened, especially when it happens after something like a pandemic or anything that could happen. Supposing there's a flood in a town and people get all sick. I mean, anything could cause one of these assessments to go back and forth, and that doesn't seem to me the very definition of an insurance. And I think that's why I have to go with the amendment. It's the right thing to do.
Okay. Dave, you got the last word.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm sorry that everybody is confused over this issue, and there is a lot of confusion. I'm a little distraught over the testimony that I heard from Health Trust because we have a fundamental difference on what RSA 5B says. They're claiming that they hold the risk of towns that are paying premiums for claims. If they run out of money, they don't hold those political subdivisions harmless. It is the political subdivisions that will have to come up with the cash to pay the taxpayer dollars to pay whatever claims are out there. That's our interpretation of the statute, and that is supported by a lot of documentation over the years, including documentation that's come out of Health Trust saying the same thing. I want to bring this back to why we're here, because I think that's really, really important. We are charged with the oversight of pooled risk organizations. It's a job that we take seriously, and we are very capable of doing that, and we have been. We became aware of some financial conditions that were concerning to us over the last couple of years. Out of the 4 risk pools, there were 2 that we had serious concerns about. One of those is now in receivership. The other is the only pooled risk organization that is fighting, our proposal tooth and nail, shopping around for a new place to go. And historically, when we've been in positions like that, that's what happens. I mean, we're in the same boat again. There is a problem here that we need to deal with. And whether it's what we're proposing is Senate Bill 297 with the Carson Amendment, because that takes the assessment at the town level and moves it to the risk pool. So they would actually have a 4% higher threshold, than what has been discussed here. To fix that, we need cooperation, and we have not been getting it from Health Trust. We're still waiting for the April financial statement so that we know what their financial condition actually is. We know that there were some accounting issues with March, and we gave that information to the committee. So we're not getting information that we need to be up to date on what's actually going on there. We're trying to fix that, and Senate Bill 297 with the Carson Amendment does that. And if that passes, everybody is going to operate just fine. Primex and School Care, the 2 other pooled risk organizations that are out there, are fine with that proposal. They have no issues with it. And we have a really good working relationship with them, that when we have issues, they deal with them. And if they have concerns, we deal with that as well. This is just a one pooled risk organization issue. And they seem to want to run their model in a different way. And the way we see it, it's operating somewhere between what RSA 5B allows and permits in statute and what a full insurance company does. And I think that's really problematic. The reason that we're concerned about surplus levels is because those are taxpayer dollars. Those are hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And when there are reserve levels above and beyond what is needed to make sure that there is a low chance of them running out of money, give that money back to the taxpayers so that they can use it for things that are really important for them instead of being in investments and managed by, you know, a third-party group. That is how these organizations are fundamentally different from insurance companies that can retain large amounts of surplus. They generate profit. They do assume the risk. I mean, if you pay your premium and you have an issue, they pay it. It doesn't matter whether they run out of money or not. They're responsible for it, and that's a fundamental difference. So all we're asking with this bill is let's address a real problem that exists that we've identified as a regulator. The reason we came to the legislature with the issue is because we saw a repeat of 10 years ago when we dealt with the last lawsuit that ended up costing taxpayers well over $2 million. And I don't see the need to spend that kind of money when we can resolve the issue by the policymakers. If this bill dies, that's where we're headed. It's going to be another expensive legal battle to make sure that we get things right. I think that's all I have to say. My office door is open the next week, so. If
So
anybody
I
has
have
any
one
questions-
question, Dave.
Sure.
How do you feel about a dual system?
I'm opposed to any system. I'm not opposed. I support any system that will work, but I want to address the fundamental problem and the reason why we're here in the first place. If there wants to be a discussion about how these things get managed in the future, I'm happy to have that
Right.
conversation.
And the reason I say that is I feel like at this point where we're at is, and you're focusing on health trusts and notwithstanding my issue, which was who should have been the regulator in the first place. But now we have lack of confidence in that relationship between you and them. And so the issue is, as for us as the legislature, should we just throw up our hands and say, let's see what happens, okay? Or should we maybe say, okay, let's allow a dual system. Let's allow that, the risk pool, given that there is no final answer exactly what a risk pool should be or who they should be or who their operator should be, because it's all over the country. Every state seems to have a different model. So having a dual model is means that New Hampshire is open to options, open to opportunity, and that if those who are perfectly happy working with your model, that assumes that we will pass this amendment because, as we know, that amendment is critical to take out some of the concerns people had with the underlying bill. But if we pass that and then say, but also that any risk pool could choose to come under this other model, that at least then maybe will help the marketplace in general thrive, and maybe we could get some competition because people, then more people could see there's different ways to get involved in this business, and wouldn't that give a better opportunity for you to have someone who the people who are with you are people who are happy to be with you?
Like I said, I'm willing to have that discussion, but I think it's one that is going to take some time. I don't think you can make that change because of unintended things happening. I had a chance to glance over the amendment that you proposed. I think that there are some things in there that concern me about the level of taxpayer reserves that can be held, and whether that might lead to an opportunity to create a monopoly type risk pool situation, and I'd be really concerned about that. And
Well, not if we have a parallel system, a statute that competes completely, has a different operating rules and a different different regulator, then we might have some competition there.
I just think at the tail end of the session, having that,
Then we
broad
should
focus-
retain the bill?
If that's what the committee decides to do, I would be fine with that.
You would rather retain it than to pass a dual system?
Well, I would rather retain the bill so that could be a really good involved discussion where we could understand what the ramifications of that might be. I would like to deal with the current issue, which is the reason why that bill was
Well, we know
introduced in the first
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Yeah, one way or the other, we're going to deal with it.
Fair enough. Anybody else would like to?
I have a question.
Representative Teresa, yes.
So the latest testimony that we just heard from Health Trust is that they don't have any preference. I'm just quoting their word. They don't have any preference over who regulates them. Their concern was basically the reserve level. They feel that 12 to 16% reserve level is not enough for them to operate. They would like to see 20%. I would like to know, is that a possibility to raise? And what are your concerns, questions, or comments on that part?
If you were to pass the Carson Amendment that was offered to the committee, it takes the assessment language from the original bill that would be held by the towns and moves it to the reserve held by the risk pool. So that would move the range up to 16 being the threshold. With special authorization, they could hold an additional 2%. That takes it up to 18. And then with the 4% assessment reserve, that would take it up to 22. So it's that number is much, much closer to where they say they would like to be.
They were talking 20% actually. They're more comfortable with 20%. I would like to see your concerns.
Yeah.
Your concerns on
They were
20%.
talking 24%.
I thought they said 20%.
Okay. So, anyway,
So I just wanted to hear your thoughts and your concerns about raising to 20%. What's your perspective on that? Because it looks like that is the only showstopper for them to continue with you being the regulator for them. That's why I'm just presenting the question.
So I know that all of you get flooded with email to the point that you probably can't read all of it, but we did send an email out, and we can resend it if you didn't see it. But we actually took the graph that Health Trust provided on their, it was actually from a document on their website that showed their claims levels and their.
Yeah, I read that one. Yeah, I
and-
saw that.
And then on that, we overlaid the percentage thresholds that are being proposed in 297 plus the Carson Amendment. And that range is well within their operating reserves. And they should be able to operate comfortably with that, with a minimal risk of running out of money in any given
So it
year.
seems like there seems to be some dialogue between you and the Health Trust officials
Well, no,
to come to
here's-
an agreement on that
Representative Teresa,
threshold level. That's all.
Representative Teresa, this is where I'm going to step in. Now, the legislature has no business setting numbers like that. That is something that is done by people who know what they're doing. We would normally, when it comes to setting those kind of guidelines, we would be relying on the experts and do it by rule. We
Yeah.
wouldn't do it by statute.
No, I understand that.
That is fundamentally why I didn't like the bill when it came over. Okay, notwithstanding the amendment. Okay,
I understand that. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to understand the discrepancy, how to work on that discrepancy. That's all
I
my.
got it.
That's
Well,
my
you're
intention
doing a
was.
great job to making sure this bill gets retained. Okay. Next question. Representative Gibbs, you have a question for?
Yes,
For the
thank you,
Secretary of
Mr.
State?
Chair. And thank you for taking my question. Okay, I've heard you say that you preferred 297 as it came to us with the Carson Amendment. I have not seen the Carson Amendment, so I can't speak to that. And you heard me say that I found the bill as it came to us to be very confusing. And I guess I'm confused as to why 297 is so confusing and the amendment is so clear, and why in that case 297 would be preferable.
Thank you for the question. I personally don't find Senate Bill 297 confusing because all it deals with is, a range of thresholds within which reserve levels should be kept. It doesn't change the administration practices. It doesn't change the types of products that can be offered to the various political subdivisions. It doesn't talk about who should serve on the board of directors. It is just a financial component to, the reserve levels that have to be maintained so that they don't run the risk of, dropping down into a critically dangerous area.
Follow up, please.
The question?
But that's what I found confusing. It was the part about the reserve levels. It's if you're above 5%, you do this, but if you're below 5%, you do that. But if you're above 4%, you do this, and if you're below 4%, you do that. And that was extremely confusing. And I have to say that Representative Hunt makes a lot of sense to me in saying
It
that
always makes a lot of sense.
perhaps it should not be up to the legislature to set those percentages. That it might make more sense to do that by rulemaking, or to have the experts in your office or in the Department of Insurance or whoever is the best expert to do that, rather than setting it by statute.
Would you believe?
I would believe that. Thank you.
Okay. Since you haven't asked a question yet, I was ready to wrap this up here.
Okay, sorry. So I'm just addressing the Secretary of State. We have a person that came in and talked about that the towns, we have so many little towns, and they rely upon these risk pools. And the woman that got up and talked to us said they can't afford to lose. They only have a few people, and they use that. And with the Carson Amendment, it would hurt them rather than help them. And can you speak to that?
Sure, but
What will happen to
they may be
towns?
slightly confused because it was the Senate Bill 297 as it was amended coming out of the Senate that gave the towns the opportunity to create a 4% reserve at the local level, and that they could use that money if there was an assessment that was made. And the towns were viewing that as the creating of an additional taxpayer-funded fund within the town. That's concerning to them. I get it. And the management, the administration of those types of funds would also be challenging for the cities and towns. So the way that was addressed was to have an additional reserve level held by the risk pool, that in the case an assessment was needed, the risk pool would already have those funds in their reserve to be able to tap it. So the cities and towns really would see no impact at all with the Carson Amendment on that bill. They would simply, pay the rates that are charged by the pooled risk organization, and that would be the end of it.
That is true. Okay. We're going to do this again next Tuesday morning, but do you have something briefly you would like to offer up? I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, this is not a hearing. This is a subcommittee, so that's why I wasn't paying much attention to your pink card. But if you want to come up and speak, Representative Brown, you certainly are entitled.
Yeah, I'm Pam Brown, representing Kingston and East Kingston, and my town's mainly concerned about experiencing a massive assessment mid-year when we've already set the budget. I'm also an economist, and I'm looking at these pooled risk nonprofits. Some seem to mimic successful insurance companies, and some just seem to be failed experiments. Health Trust has characterized the issue as a transfer of risk, but it's really not a transfer. In fact, Health Trust simply was not pricing the premiums properly. That is the problem. In fact, Mr. Lee, the actuary who testified, indicated that on 8 occasions in their minutes, it was explained that the rates were much too low to cover claims, and they deliberately said we're going to keep the premiums where they are. So to me, it's really a moral hazard issue. These organizations are just, to me, pale imitations of an efficiently run insurance company. Health Trust Board has had a social studies teacher on there, along with human resources people and town administrators. And recently, the social studies teacher came off of their board. They also advertised their positions for Health Trust Board of Directors, saying you are protected. Members are indemnified against legal action pertaining to the service on the board. So to me, it's a large moral hazard problem we see here. Some of them are running efficiently. When they express concerns about losing autonomy, well, absolutely, you have to price rates to cover claims. So I think that's an issue. The 22 provisions I heard you discuss the other day seem like you're just reinventing the wheel and redesigning these nonprofits to mimic insurance companies, which is fine. So I noticed there was a select board meeting in Rye where they discussed this bill. And one of the suggestions was that municipalities could explore obtaining coverage through commercial markets. What a concept, because although we malign private sector markets, they are ruled by profit and loss. Profit just means surplus, which is controlled by competition and rivalry to keep that surplus down and rates down, but they're also ruled by avoidance of loss. And to me, I think we should look at the private sector more when we want insurance plans than these nonprofits run by volunteers with very little experience, when actuary science is a very difficult and demanding field. And I like what was said about democracy being the worst form of government except for all the others. Well, competitive enterprise is the worst form of economic organization except for all the others. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we will do this again Tuesday morning, and probably will push off the exec session to Tuesday afternoon. And see you all then. Okay, we have one more bill, the ambulance bill, and we, at this point, we don't actually have an amendment for the ambulance bill. So what we do have is a presentation. What's that?
I have a handout for you.
Okay. And Commissioner, it's so nice to see you. And Representative Miles would love to talk to you.
So I've heard, and I will say that I much prefer to see Representative Miles than the Executive Council, where I just came back from.
Yeah. I did know you were preoccupied with a higher order of business than this committee. So
They do have the ability to fire me, so.
What? We don't have that? Okay. So this is from a negotiated compromise on the ambulance bill, and I guess I would. Shelby, you wanna, rather than having it come from me as one of the people who was a party to this, and I will have this somewhat.
So, as you said, we were meeting together as a group of stakeholders to try to negotiate a bill that would be a compromise between two of the ambulance bills that were pending, the one that came out of the House and then the one that came out of the Senate. So just to level set, the one in the House set rates based off the cost study, and those were around 202% of Medicare. The one that came out of the Senate sets a benchmark rate of 325% of Medicare. So we had been negotiating. A lot of the stakeholders met in good faith to come up with some compromise terms, and the term sheet in front of you is kind of where we're landed. So the department is in the process of putting this into actual legislation in the form of a draft amendment, and we will get that to you as soon as we can. The key elements here of the compromise are that balance billing would be prohibited. So there'll be a prohibition on balance billing, just like there was in the original House bill. It then sets a temporary rate structure. So this rate structure would be in place for 2 years while the department undertakes another cost study that goes in a little bit beyond what we did in the last cost study. So under the temporary rate structure, it's a tiered system in that there's an in-network rate and an out-of-network rate. The in-network rate is set at $325. The out-of-network rate is set at $100. The big difference there is to incentivize providers to come in-network. So to help with that, if we just put those rates in, there was concern that either the providers or the carriers could kind of drag their feet, not get around to contracting, and then that 325% wouldn't be available. So to address that issue, we're putting in an any willing ambulance provider provision so that any ambulance provider who's willing to accept the terms of the contract can enter a contract, and the carrier cannot unilaterally exclude them. In addition to that, there's going to be a standardized provider contract that the insurance department works with the carriers to come up with, and that will be the standardized contract that's available under the any willing provider. We're also going to put in some incentives. So we understand based off of our discussions that it can take some time to actually get into contract. There's a lot of things that, there's forms that need to be filled out. People need to review the contracts, all of that, and it takes time. We want to make sure that that's available in good faith, the in-network rate. So what the insurance department will be doing is we are going to develop a form that providers can fill out and submit to the carrier and copy the insurance department. And at that point, that will initiate the in-network rate. We will keep a list of what negotiations are going to make sure that those negotiations keep moving forward and that it's clear who is entitled to the in-network rate versus the out-of-network rate. If once the carrier has all the necessary paperwork, there'll be a time provision, approximately 45 days, for them to finalize that contract. And if they fail to do that, we would be able to take enforcement action against them. On the provider side, there's going to be a time frame where they have to continue to work on these issues in good faith. So if the carrier is requesting additional information from them, they would have to respond within 60 days. If they fail to do that after the 60 days, they would go back to the out-of-network rate until they re-engage in the contracting process. So there's incentives on both sides to get that contract signed and finished. At the end of the 2 years, the rates sunset. And at that point, the insurance department will take the results of this second cost study and go through rulemaking to set the new rate. After that, we will adjust that rate moving forward every year using an inflationary factor for healthcare costs. So and there's also a commission. So the commission will then look at some of the overarching issues that face the ambulance providers, looking into the feasibility of implementing an all-payer model to address the underfunding of Medicare and Medicaid. Also look at alternative delivery models for ambulance providers to kind of address some of those systemic issues facing that industry.
I would just conclude by saying, reminding you, 40 years we have struggled as to how best to address this problem with balance billing. And in that time, layered on top of that public policy challenge has come the fact that EMS providers in certain parts of our state are going under. They're not able to maintain themselves financially anymore, which is potentially leaving large geographic swaths of the state without adequate ambulatory care. And so what this compromise has achieved is finally prohibiting balance billing so that our consumers are not getting these surprise bills that they never knew would be coming, don't understand them, and some of them can be quite high and be a huge financial burden for people. And on the other hand, for a 2-year period, we are stabilizing the EMS provider network with an eye towards a longer-term, more comprehensive, more diverse cost study to drill back down into the cost for those services for the commercially insured population. Like any compromise, there are aspects of it that I'm sure you like. There are aspects of it that I am sure you don't like as much. But I think, as I've said, for the first time in 40 years, we've put forward something that stops some immediate problems and puts in place a process to which we can get to a permanent, sustainable solution to these issues.
Okay. Representative Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for helping us out and testifying today. I understand the insurance company's rationale for wanting to incentivize the providers to sign contracts and come into the network, but I'm not sure I understand the insurance department's rationale for wanting to incentivize the providers to come into the network. Can you provide me with a little more information?
I see it as a benefit to both parties to be in contract because it makes the entire process move more smoothly. It avoids potholes in the road, if you will. Each side knows exactly what to expect in the agreement, and ultimately out of that comes a better experience for the patient, for the individual that needs the care. So, like I said, I think when you're looking at the three parties involved in this dynamic, the provider, the carrier, and the consumer, it's in everybody's best interest to be in that contract, to be in network, because ultimately, as I've said, the process moves more smoothly. The overhead is less. You're not chasing people around for bills or trying to figure out where you're sending the checks and all of this. You're not haggling over the rate. That's established. It's right in the contract. Everybody knows what to expect. Everybody's on the same playing field in these dynamics. So thus was the...
Yeah, I'd like to comment on it too, Representative Gibbs, that historically, this committee has been dealing with the balance billing issue. And what we always got when it was coupled with the balance billing issue, and that's not just the ambulances, let's talk about the anesthesiologists and the pathologists and all the other ones who were balance billing, was that they didn't have a contract. And that's how they were allowed to balance bill, because they didn't have a contract. So if we're going to ban contract, ban balance billing, that it is you coupled with, yes, we want them to be contracts. So in this case, it was really the provider, the ambulance companies, that didn't want to have the balance billing banned, because that's how they were trying to make their books whole. I mean, at least to get there. If the insurance companies made it clear that they very much want contracts. That was the whole point with the balance billing issue from the last 40 years, was that insurance companies said this problem wouldn't exist if they had a contract. So the question then was, when we get doing this negotiation, getting down on the wire, was who would be more tougher when it comes to writing these contracts. And the ambulance companies were saying they were afraidful that they would be handed this, inch and a half contract and have to have their lawyers figure it all out. And certainly in our position, that if we're going to give away this 325%, which has always been a position this committee has been opposed to, that that the contract was a key element. So this nuance and this negotiation process was really the last item that we were trying to struggle with to try to get. But at the end of the day, I think we have a reasonable compromise here.
Thank you. That's helpful. Can I ask a follow-up question of the insurance department?
Sure.
Thank you. You mentioned not being sure where to send the checks if the provider was out of network, but my understanding of all the three bills of both the House and the Senate was that they would all require the insurance companies to send the checks to the provider.
That issue was solved in a bill last year. We passed that bill last year.
I gave you a dated example.
He shouldn't have done that.
Well, I was just when you're talking about why it's better to be in contract, I mean, we never would have had the whole direct pay debate in the first place if there were more carriers and providers getting into contract with one another, because then there'd be no confusion or tussling over where the check went. So I think it's still a valid example to cite, but we have since, or you all have since
As we've
addressed that
chipped
issue.
away at
Yep.
it, this issue.
You're in agreement based on what we've already passed that the checks would go to the provider.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
but
Thank you.
Beyond that, there's also the ability for direct deposit or electronic funds transfer. So if you're in network, you could already have all that stuff set up. So you're not waiting for the snail mail check to get there and someone to cash it and all of that stuff. So it just improves the claim processing efficiency overall.
Representative Sharisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question actually on point number 6, where you said a second cost study will be conducted. If I recollect from a discussion during spring, you already had this study done where you mentioned that to increase to 200% of Medicare, is going to cost you $4 million. And you had mentioned, if I recollect, that to increase it 325%, it will cost $16 million. And I had contradicted that time that using the same linear model, if 200% costs you $4 million, then 325% should cost you $9 million, which you had given some explanation. The point is that why do you need a complete set of study again, costing you $400,000 when you already have the study in place and you can just, it's the same services. Same service, all you're doing is that bumping from 200% to 325%, you can just extrapolate the cost and there you go.
It's a very, very good question. So as you recall, the legislature last spring put forward a directive to the department to conduct a cost study. They set a very tight deadline on that cost study, particularly when you factored in the process you have to go through to put it out to bid, you secure your vendor, you do all of that contracting work. The period of time that the vendor had to actually do the work was fairly tight. Now, I'll say, I think with the time frame they were given, they did a lot of good work. We are not going to be doing this second cost study starting from scratch. The new vendor, I would assume, is going to pick up where the first vendor left off. But one of the things that we heard from the providers in particular was that there were nuances to their models. There were things and assumptions that were made that the providers did not feel were accurate. And so they did not feel that the first study had done an adequate job of capturing all of the costs that are associated with the services that they provide. And again, I don't think that this was sloppy work on the part of the vendor. I think it was simply they did as deep a dive as they possibly could, number one, with the knowledge they had of this specific kind of service, and also did the best they could given the time frame that they had. Under this compromise, this second cost study will have effectively a year and a half to do that work. They'll be able to collaborate more widely with a greater number of stakeholders, in this case being those providers, because remember, these providers are not all in the same bucket. You've got some commercial, and some of those commercial providers are large, some of them are small. You have municipals. Some communities are larger, some communities are smaller. And within each of those contexts, there's a nuance that needs to be appreciated. And I think that given the length of time that this second study will have to do that work, we'll get to a more accurate and more widely accepted set of numbers as to what the actual cost is to provide these services, again, for commercially insured individuals.
Okay, just quick follow-up. Just want to confirm.
Seeing as
So are you,
doing.
so is it fair to conclude that the first study where you mentioned $4 million extra cost to pass 200% of Medicare, that might not be even accurate?
He was talking about the nuance between what was the impact for the people in the premium, the ultimate premium increase.
Yeah, I thought that's what they're doing, the
Yeah,
cost study.
no, this is a cost study. You're
To provide
there's a
325%.
little apples oranges here, okay. And then this is the actual cost to do the study. What you were talking about is what he had a concern with in the last, and I think.
Yeah, we're not looking at the impact necessarily on premium. We're looking at what is the cost associated with providing these services. So once we have that cost, then yeah, there is a model where we just plug in whatever the rate is and we can figure out what the expected output is going to be. And I think in that conversation we had earlier this spring, I think the way it was reported can be confusing because there's the increase in cost. So if the service goes up by double the amount, then yeah, the cost associated with that service is essentially doubles.
Ultimately increasing the premium, basically.
Yes, and that's not a direct correlation to what you would expect to see in premium. So just because it's a huge impact on the healthcare costs, the way that actually gets allocated into premium varies based on a lot of other rating factors. So that's why those are not, it's not a linear correlation.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that what extra cost study you're going to do besides what you have already done, because it's a second cost
We'll
study.
essentially be building off of that original cost study.
Okay.
Another thing that we weren't able to do in the small amount of time is we had to accept the data as it was submitted, and there was no opportunity to follow up with the data submitters or do any kind of
We had no audit
no
on the
auditing or verification. So
Okay.
with the more time, we'll be able to do some more. of
It'll be
that
more
type of
accurate.
work.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And I would just add one more, I think, important point, Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes.
What this 2-year stopgap compromise also provides for, and I've said this very consistently in the 3-4 years now that I've talked about this, is it provides the EMS providers the opportunity to look at their business models and figure out where they can find efficiencies, how they can innovate to bring down their costs. Because once this second cost study is done and over with, that's the rate that's going to move forward. And because that will be the agreed upon, settled, established rate to cover the cost. And it's not going to address for the fact that the vast majority of their rides, as you know, come from Medicare and Medicaid. Those rates are set. They can't negotiate them. And that oftentimes the reimbursement that they receive from those two programs does not adequately cover the cost to provide those services. That's the reality of it. And there's nothing that we're able to do about that. I mean, you have some control over Medicaid rates, but the Fed set the Medicare rates. And so given those realities and given the fact that, again, the second cost study is only going to look at how we cover the cost of those services, not how do we turn a profit or how do we help the providers get in the black. They're going to have to figure out how they right-size their business model to make themselves sustainable. But as I said, in that interim 2-year period, they're going to have the time to do that. We'll have the opportunity to engage a vendor to do a more in-depth cost study analysis that appreciates the nuances. And so that's why we're buying a little bit of time here. But the big win, obviously, for the consumer is no more balance billing. You all don't have to hear about that every year anymore, I should hope. And then we'll get to work ensuring that the implementation of this compromise goes as intended. And as I said, everybody's walking away from this with a homework assignment for the future.
With that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will have this amendment should be available to us again next Tuesday morning, and then we'll exec everything Tuesday afternoon. All right, with that, we will close the subcommittee.